At the time of this incident, I was 16, and my brother and my father and I were on a road trip traveling through Nevada and California as my graduation gift. It was the end of August, and after a long trip from Las Vegas, cruising through Los Angeles and heading north across to California, we decided to stay in beautiful Santa Barbara for a few days. My father found us a motel not too far from the beach, and we were all in wonder as to the movie-like beauty of the city we were staying in. On the first evening there, and making our way back to the motel, shortly after feasting on greasy pizza from Rusty's Pizza Parlor, and walking along one of the most beautiful beaches in the USA, I started to feel a bit bored in the room. After having watched the television with my father and my brother for about an hour, for a change of scenery, I decided to peek out through our room window. As I knelt on the purple carpeted floor and drew the thick and heavy curtains out, a sense of dread took a hold of my whole being. I'm immediately startled by what I can see across the street. About 100 feet from our motel room window, I'm looking at something that is at odds with the beautiful picture-like frame created by the motel lobby entrance arch, delimiting it from my field of view. A beautiful shadow and light setting that was created by the streetlight beam on the pavement reveals a man whose physical traits are hooded by the shadows cast downward by the light. He is standing right under the streetlight, half in the darkness of the night, as if knowing what the effect of the light was having on his appearance. He looked like he was in his late 20s, early 30s, and was staring right at me, his gaze like a laser beam I could feel all the way down my body. I couldn't see his eyes from this distance, but I could feel them, and my subconscious picked up on the intent, which wasn't good. It seemed like he had been waiting for me to look out at him, and for a long time too, as if he knew it would happen. A few seconds later, still staring at me, he started a slow clockwork motion of sliding his index finger sideways across his throat and underneath his jaw from left to right, over and over again, as if to silently tell me he's going to kill me. As I felt the floor beneath me start to sink, and the taste of metal overwhelmed the top of my tongue, I closed the curtains as quick as I could, as if my life depended on it. I turned away from the window and towards my father, telling him what I'd just seen. He just shrugged it off, whilst talking over the baseball game on TV, and told me to just let it go. But I could feel, along this calm vibe of complacency coming from him, there was a hint of uneasiness that I can taste in the back of my mouth. 30 seconds go by and I stupidly kneel down uncomfortably again on the motel carpet below the windowsill. Against my best judgment, I draw the curtains out a second time, but this time my hands stop at the width of my head, allowing it into view just enough of the outside world to be able to grasp what is happening outside of my seemingly safe motel room. He is there again, only this time the man is standing 2/3 of the way to where he stood the first time. His facial traits are now darkened by the lack of a streetlight, but I can still feel his crazy gaze. This time he is under the motel lobby parking lot arch. He is still doing the throat-slicing gesture, still communicating to me through this wicked pantomime. There is this desperate feeling of unfair doom in realizing that your poor, vulnerable self is the target of something evil that doesn't know you as a being with needs and fears, but knows and wants something from you which you are oblivious to. I'm starting to feel queasy and frightened, so I close the curtains quickly, and once again I tell my dad of the man's presence and his approaching of the room. I get on the bed, trying to concentrate on the TV, trying to forget what I've just witnessed. I don't remember if my dad looked through the window to confirm what was happening. All I remember is him telling me to stop looking outside if what I see is scary, and that we were perfectly safe in the room, which was locked. After what seemed like a few minutes passing by, I peeked out again for the last time, and I see that the man is right in the parking lot, about 50 feet from our motel room, doing the gesture again. I started to think that maybe the man is mentally ill or something, and that I better stop looking out the window. The man's behaviour, although redundant and pathetic, nonetheless strikes me as being ominous and frightening. The night went on with that feeling that even if I'm probably safe inside our room, there is still a disturbed man who's got nothing to lose, outside our room, behaving as if he has bad intentions. As far as I know, he could be leaning right on the window pane a few minutes from now if this keeps going. Would he be grinning or not? Would he raise his arm to gently tap on the window whilst kneeling under the windowsill? I try not to think about it, and I sleep uneasily that night. The following morning, not wanting to go outside of the room, I decided to stay in with my brother while my father went out into the motel lobby to fetch some breakfast and to speak to the motel clerk about the man outside the night before. My father arrives back at the room after a couple of minutes with our breakfast and said that the clerk had told him that the guy who frightened me last night is known in the area for his mental illnesses and that he's probably a schizophrenic. My dad then reassured me that the clerk told him the man is not dangerous and that we're safe staying there for another couple of nights. Luckily, I never saw the man again for the duration of our stay. Fast forward a couple of years, and my father and I are reminiscing about our trip to California, and especially about those days in Santa Barbara. When the mentally ill man was mentioned in the conversation, my father, as if relieved from not having to keep this thing secret anymore, finally tells me that the morning after that dreadful night, the motel clerk had in fact told him to be careful with the man. He had told him that he was, in fact, very dangerous. My dad just didn't want to scare us by telling the truth. I thanked him for lying to me, though. In April of last year, my boyfriend and I were walking home from our friend's house. I had just finished my first year at college, and we wanted to go out and celebrate and have some fun. We live in a rural town, and our friend lived on the far side of it, so our walk was about a half hour or so. I'd had a drink or two and smoked some of the joint they had rolled. Smoking makes me paranoid, and this night was no different. We left at about maybe 10 or 11 p.m, and everything was perfectly normal, until we got to the end of the long street that would eventually lead to my house. This street always felt so long to walk, like hours can pass and you barely make a dent in the amount of steps made. The street we turned onto from this road was maybe 10 blocks from my house. A few minutes after we turned onto this road, I felt like something was off, but my boyfriend said that I was stoned and reminded me that I'm a pretty paranoid person to begin with, which I am, and this white pickup truck that was parked in front of some house turned on and began to drive slowly away. Then it parked up again. I watched it to see if it was just me being paranoid, but it then proceeded to stop a couple of houses down and sit there with the engine still running. As soon as we gotten closer to it, it drove away, parking a little further away again. This continued until we got to the end of my street. At this point, I kept telling my boyfriend that I'm not paranoid and that this truck was fucking with us, and he went quiet. A couple of houses down from mine, the truck then drove to the end of the street, where my house is on the corner, and there's a dead end right by my house because we lived near a river. It stops for a moment at the dead end and proceeds to turn around and flick on its high beams. Then it began to slowly drive towards us. My boyfriend stuck his arm out in front of me, stopping me from walking any further as the truck continued to approach. My house is so close yet so far. It then slowly drove by us, and we can see that the windows are tinted, but we can also see two silhouettes. And because they had blinded us, we didn't think to look at the license plates or even the model of the truck. I swear I felt like that was the night I was going to die, or worse. My thoughts held around in my mind, and I could see that my boyfriend was in the same mindset. My boyfriend, being pretty quick on his feet, waited until the truck disappeared from sight and took my hand before racing to my house and locking the door. He had thought about turning down one of the other streets so we could try to lose them, but he figured he'd wait until they were out of sight completely to book it to my house so they wouldn't see which house we went in. We looked out one of the front windows very cautiously and saw the truck come back into view and begin to drive around the block, presumably looking for us. This went on for 10 minutes. I called the police to inform them that we had been followed, but without the license plates or model, they could only keep their eyes open for a suspicious white truck. I was adamant that these people had to know one of us, if not me, because they drove until they were beside my house. But whether they actually knew it was my house or not, I don't know. My boyfriend tried to insist that it was probably a bunch of kids trying to mess with us, but I don't believe that. A few days later, we heard that someone was picked up and was last seen in a white truck. Since this night, there have been stories in the paper and online that people have been grabbed off the street and were trafficked in the area. I'm still seeing reports even today, which prompted this unsettling memory. It makes me wonder if that's what they were up to. Were they after both of us or just one of us? Or were they truly just a bunch of assholes trying to mess with us? Either way, I don't care to know. Whenever I see a white truck, I become on edge. It may be silly, but the events of that night are still fresh in my mind. I live in Nantes, West France. I'm quite a petite girl, and I avoid confrontation whenever I can. And I'm pretty good at it because since I can remember, I've had a very strong sixth sense. I try to avoid people who make me anxious. It allowed me to survive some very dangerous situations, even a kidnapping, but that's a different story. Yesterday I visited a very close friend of mine. A few days prior to the visit, she had broken her leg, so I decided to go cheer her up by giving her a few gifts. We were having such a great time that we hadn't noticed it had gotten dark outside, but despite the late hour, I decided to go home. I said goodbye to my friend and left her apartment. I was about 40 minutes from home, and I had walked this distance many times before without any problems, so I thought it would be the same this time. Oh, how wrong I was. Less than 5 minutes into my walk, I felt the rest of the way was going to be hell. I was approaching one of the many bridges in our city, and I didn't see anyone around. I thought my senses were playing a trick on me though. This has happened before, so I kept going. The bridge was about 20 meters in front of me before I heard a conversation and a giggle. I turned my head slightly and saw 3 men walking towards me. I felt a cold sweat on my back, but it was too late to turn around. I didn't want to show them that I was afraid, as I know this type of behavior provokes more harassment, so I kept walking but turned the music I was listening to down. But I didn't take my headphones off, because I didn't want them to realize I was suspicious. I heard their footsteps behind me, and they were saying something, but I didn't know exactly what because they were speaking in a different language. I was already on the bridge when they caught up with me. As I said, I'm a petite girl, and they were over 180 centimeters tall. They suddenly surrounded me, and I had no choice but to go ahead. A shudder ran through my body. I didn't know what they wanted or what they were saying, but I felt that I was in danger. They leaned over me and whispered something into my ears, and then they laughed. This sound will haunt me for the rest of my life. At one point they noticed I was doing my best to ignore them, and then the worst began. They started making animal noises. It may sound strange and maybe even funny, but it was terrifying to me. They howled, growled, whistled, and kissed the air loudly, and they did it really close to my face. I was now desperate to get away, but where could I go? I was on the bridge. I would kill myself if I jumped into the water, or at least break both my legs if I were lucky. Those 2 minutes to cross the bridge felt like an eternity to me. When we got to the end of the bridge, I was sweaty and close to tears. I thought I was going to throw up, and I was shaking, which seemed to amuse them even more. Then a miracle happened. Someone very loudly called my name. I looked up and saw someone approaching us. He was a very tall man, several years older than me, but I didn't know him. I had no idea who he was or how he knew my name. It didn't matter though. "What are you doing to my girlfriend?" he demanded, still frowning at them. He stretched out his hand in my direction, never taking his eyes off them. "Come on, sweetheart." I didn't wait, but I didn't know who he was. Why was he helping me? I didn't care. I gripped his hand tightly and almost nestled against his shoulder. My heart was beating fast and loud, but I was so thankful that he came to help me. The three strangers and my saviour exchanged glances. They were silent. I was starting to panic that they would attack him because he was there alone, and I wouldn't have the strength to help him if they did. But it didn't happen. I almost heard their teeth grinding in rage. My saviour held my hand tightly and watched them. They turned around and went back on the bridge. We stood in the same place for some time. He looked at me and smiled, and at that moment my body gave up. I started shaking uncontrollably, and I almost drowned in my own tears. He didn't say a word. He just held my hand and gave me time to cool down. After a long moment, he offered to take me home. We walked slowly and talked about various things. Actually, he was talking all the time. I was just nodding. I found out he was walking near the bridge and noticed the whole scene. He decided to react and help me if it turned out that his assumptions were correct. I asked him how he knew me and how he knew my name. He looked surprised, then smiled and said he didn't know my name. He used this name because it was one of the most popular in our country. When we got home, I was still shaking but happy. I offered him something to drink. I don't live alone, so I wasn't worried about letting him in, but he kindly declined and we said goodbye. I can't believe how lucky I was yesterday. If I hadn't have met him, I don't know if I would be writing about it today. So Luke, thank you. As to these three strangers, I hope one day you will understand that your behaviour is reprehensible, and you will change your attitude to women who walk alone. Back in the late 2000s, I had just finished up my useless degree and was struggling to find work. I was living in Midwestern college town, where everyone and their dog had some higher level of education, so it wasn't uncommon to find people with PhDs working for $10 an hour as a cashier. But the town was cute and affordable, so people liked to stay post-graduation. I found a decent job at a coffee shop over the summer, but once the fall semester started, my hours were cut and I was replaced with my cheaper, younger baristas. A co-worker suggested I try becoming a nanny. I wasn't particularly interested in working with kids, but she assured me it was good money, so I decided to join a website for nannies and babysitters, and very quickly was contacted by a family. I met the parents for a quick interview and was hired fairly quickly. The pay was excellent and the hours were great. They were 8 a.m. to 4 p.m, so I had the evenings to myself and free weekends. Both parents were professors at the local university, and they had 2 children and were expecting their third very soon. Henry was 8 and Jane was 3. Both children were incredibly intelligent, Jane in particular. She had the vocabulary of a much older child. I was primarily responsible for her, since Henry spent most of the day in school. Jane was a very serious little girl. She could carry very in-depth conversations, and I used to joke with her mum that she was like a 60-year-old trapped in a toddler's body. Now Henry. Henry was a beautiful kid, I'll give him that. He had thick, dark, curly hair, long eyelashes, piercing blue eyes and dimples. He has the ability to be sweet, loving and funny, but I quickly learned this was a skill set he only used when it benefited him. Overall, Henry was a true monster. I have an older brother and 2 younger brothers, so I'm familiar with sibling relationships, and I know fighting is normal. However, Henry actually tormented Jane. I've never seen a child get so much joy out of causing pain, fear, and discomfort to another human being. He loved nothing more than to terrify her with stories or monsters or ghosts. He had convinced Jane that there was a demon living in their basement, so she refused to go down with me when I had to do laundry. Over a couple of weeks, I had slowly got her to sit on the bottom step and play while I folded clothes, so I could keep an eye on her. She was so proud of her bravery, but when Henry came home and saw she had conquered her fears, he made it his duty to terrify her even more, and all progress was lost. He was so terribly mean to his little sister. I was worried about her physical safety when he was home. He would constantly taunt her, pinch her, threaten her, and destroy her belongings. I despised the hour I had with him every evening after picking him up from school. The entire time would be filled with crying and screaming, and his refusal to obey. I would try to tell him off occasionally by saying he couldn't act however he wished, that he was a child, and I was the adult, etc. "You aren't the king of this castle, Henry." This is something my parents used to say to me. "I am the king. I'm King Henry. Off with your head," he had responded, and he was right. I didn't have any less control over him than his parents. They, let's call them Elizabeth and Michael, were absolutely clueless. Dad was work-obsessed and incredibly hands-off, and Mum was a sweetheart, but also a doormat, and allowed both kids to walk all over her. They had no discipline whatsoever. So a lot of Henry's behaviours made sense. Why would he need to behave if no one ever made him? I was shocked to watch how Henry treated his mother, and how she allowed him to mock her, call her names, and act aggressively towards her. It wasn't unusual for him to tell her she looked ugly and needed to go change or put her hair down. And she'd go and do it. He threatened to punch her stomach if she didn't do what he wanted. He'd pinch her in the back of her arms when she displeased him. She made excuse after excuse for his behaviour, calling him exceptionally bright and bored and having a difficult time adjusting to her pregnancy. When the new baby was born, things got even worse. Thankfully, he didn't attempt to hurt baby Peggy, but his aggression and violence towards his mother and Jane got so much worse. One afternoon, he found his mum's sewing needles and tried to trick Jane into sitting on one. When it didn't work, he stuck one right into her tiny arm. She screamed and I freaked out and removed it and called both parents ASAP. Elizabeth arrived home, concerned for Jane, and for the first time seemed at least frustrated by Henry's behaviour. She attempted to scold him, and he became so enraged he started punching her in her newly postpartum stomach. She only responded by crying and hugging him and asking him why he was so angry and wanted to hurt his sister. He responded with a cold, "I'm angry because you should have miscarried them both. They both should have died inside you." My jaw hit the floor. Elizabeth stopped crying and just stared at him, and then me. I assumed they were going to potentially get this kid some help, but when I approached the subject the next day, I was brushed off and told that they had a talk with Henry and it was just an outburst due to an unrelated issue at school. Another excuse. Henry continued to torment the entire family, and he started to target me as well. For the past few months, he mostly ignored me. He has in the past occasionally called me ugly, or thrown the laundry I had just folded all over the room, but he had yet to get physical with me. But this changed one day when he unfortunately had the day off from school, so I got to spend the entire day with him at home, while also caring for Jane and Peggy. It was challenging, but by 10 a.m. he was bored of torturing Jane and went to go play in his room. The rest of the morning went decently with him occupied in his room, until lunchtime, where he spilled his plate all over the table because I didn't cut his crusts the right way. I cleaned it up. I had admitted my defeat weeks ago. I couldn't enforce any rules or boundaries if the parents didn't back me up. I put the girls down for a nap and Henry asked me to read him a story. For the first time, he was calm and genuinely sweet with me. I read him the BFG, and he cuddled a bit closer. I thought for a bit that maybe this kid just really needs more one-on-one time. I was about 30 minutes into the book when I felt a small hand reach under my shirt and touch my stomach. I looked at him, and he stared at me. I gently picked up his hand and told him it wasn't appropriate to touch other people without asking. He seemed angry but let me continue reading. I noticed that he had stopped paying attention to the story and was looking at me all over. Before I could ask him what was wrong, his hand was under my shirt and making its way from my breast, when I yanked it away and stood up. I firmly, trying not to yell, told him that what he had just done was incredibly inappropriate and that he's never to touch anyone underneath their clothes ever again. Henry looked at me and said, "I can touch whoever I want, wherever I want, whenever I want. You can't stop me, and no one can stop me. I was creeped out and felt violated. I know he was a child, but just imagine how that feels as an adult woman. I know children aren't the best with personal space or boundaries, but Henry was almost 9, and I knew he knew what he did wasn't appropriate or okay. The intent behind it seemed sinister. I ended our story session and tried to get through the rest of the day. I was so glad he'd be back in school for the rest of the week. I did decide to let his mother know because it felt weird not to. She thought it was funny. She kind of chuckled and said he is a very sensory-orientated kid and was just trying to be affectionate. At that point, I honestly decided that I was never going to talk sense into these parents, and I needed to look for another job. I knew I was going to put my 2 weeks in pretty soon. I was very sad because I was close to Jane and Peggy, and felt like I was abandoning them. But I had discussed Henry's behaviour with my roommate, and she was concerned about potential legal ramifications for me if Henry did something to one of the girls on my watch. I came back to work on Monday, and Jane had a black eye. Henry had accidentally punched her in the eye during an argument. I was so sad for her. I asked her what had happened later, and she told me that she was playing in her room when Henry came in, took her doll, and when she tried to grab it back, he punched her square in the eye and laughed. Henry was so evil at home, and I wondered why his teacher never seemed to mention any behavioural issues in the classroom. One evening while picking him up, I mentioned Henry was difficult at home and wondered if she had issues with him at school. She said no, that he was very well behaved and had no issues, and he had a lot of friends. I was very surprised. I assumed Henry was disturbed and that his poor behaviour transferred into class, but the teacher denied this. I frankly didn't believe her, so one afternoon the girls and I left early and arrived at his school so I could see how he interacted. She was right. He sat at his desk quietly, raised his hand, seemed genuinely friendly to his peers. For some reason, this stark difference in Henry's personality from home to school terrified me even more. Initially, I thought he was just a disturbed kid, but at that moment I realized how truly in control he was. Henry wasn't just an angry child with severe behavioral issues. Henry was just a mean child who knew when and where he could get away with his favorite pastime, causing misery. Thankfully, I managed to find an entry-level position in a field related to my degree in the spring. I had my 2 weeks, and Elizabeth was upset but understood. Henry, however, was livid. He made sure to tell me daily how much he hated me and how glad he was that I was leaving, and how he hoped I'd died. I was feeling less than patient with his antics, so sometimes replied a little more sarcastically than I should have to a 9-year-old child. On my last day, a Friday, my treat to Elizabeth and Michael was to let them have a date night. I picked Henry up from school at 2:55 and we headed home. Henry refused to talk to me. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't acknowledge me. I thought that this may not be the worst way to spend the next 6 hours. We arrived home, and shortly after Elizabeth and Michael came in and started to get ready for the date, the baby was about 5 months old at this point, and they hadn't been out since her birth the fall before. Henry refused to speak to anyone. Elizabeth got worried and thought about cancelling the date, not wanting to see Henry upset. But I, wrongly, assured her things would be fine, and they left around 6 p.m. The older two went to bed around 8 p.m, and the baby an hour before, so I only had to make it about 2 more hours with Henry. We ordered pizza. He refused to eat. He just sat there and sulked in his chair. I let them watch about 30 minutes of the Magic School Bus on my laptop, a treat since they didn't own a TV. While I bathed the baby, gave her a bottle and put her down in her crib. I was surprised I didn't hear a peep coming from downstairs. No crying or screaming. I felt a bit victorious that Henry was so stubborn in his silent treatment, that he didn't realize how easy he was making this evening. When I got into the living room, I noticed Henry had a sly grin on his face, the first one I'd seen all day. I let the episode finish, and I took the computer and noticed it was incredibly sticky. I quickly realized it was honey, and that Henry had gone into the kitchen and put a solid glop in his hands and rubbed it all over the bottom and back of the computer. I was just relieved he didn't get the keyboard. I took the keyboard into the kitchen, wiped it off, and then heard Jane scream. I ran into the living room, and Henry sat there with Jane right next to him, with her hand squeezed tightly with his right hand and one of the kitchen knives in the other hand. I froze. I demanded he put the knife down immediately and let his sister go. I told him this wasn't funny and he's crossed a line. He just smiled. I went and grabbed Jane, and she cried, and Henry chuckled. I really scared you. You know I could have killed her while you were upstairs, and you would have never known. The blood drained from my face. The anger I felt towards him turned into fear, and then realization that he was right. I felt so stupid. I rarely left them alone together because it usually ended in Jane being pinched, pushed, slapped, or bitten. But I guess I let my guard down given his docile behavior all day. I just started to cry and screamed at him to never ever do that again and go straight to his room. He sat and stared and went to the kitchen and put the knife back, then went upstairs. I was obviously super shaken up and was still trying to calm down as I bathed Jane and got her ready for bed. I told her I was sorry and asked if he had hurt her, and she said he hadn't. I was about as angry with myself as I was at him. I could see Henry in his room playing with his Hot Wheels set, and I told him he needed to have the lights out by 8:30 and that he could tuck himself in. He stared at me and shut the door to his room, and I prayed that would be the last time I saw him for the night. I got Jane into bed and was reading her a story when I heard his door creak. I got up, and it looked as if he had cracked the door, but the lights were off. I continued reading until I suddenly heard Peggy start to gently cry, but she sounded close. I sprung up, and outside the doorframe I could see Henry holding the baby over the banister. I couldn't even scream. I've never moved so fast in my life. I got to Peggy and grabbed her and just ran back into Jane's room. I shut the door and shouted at Henry, asking him why he would do this, which was a stupid question. I knew why. To torment me, to make me realize how easily he could access his younger sisters and potentially hurt them. Henry could have dropped Peggy, and he could have hurt Jane with that knife, but he didn't, and I don't think that was ever his intention. He just wanted to let me know I wasn't doing my job nearly as well as I thought, and that in the end he was the one always in control. It took a while to calm myself and the girls down and get them to sleep. It was close to 9 by the time I left their bedrooms, and I saw that Henry was still up in his room reading on his bed. I just kinda looked at him. I was so relieved that this was my last day dealing with this kid and his bullshit. But I felt sad and scared for his sisters. I told him it was time for bed and that I was going to tell his parents about what had happened. He didn't respond. I turned out the lights, and then I heard him call my name. You can tell them, but it's a waste of your time. You're just lucky. You're really lucky. I can do what I want. I can hurt who I want. I can touch who I want. You are all really lucky. I just shut his door and left. Elizabeth and Michael came home a little later than expected and paid me. I didn't mention what had happened that night because it did feel pointless, but the next day I ended up sending a text. I got a long response from Elizabeth, full of excuses about Henry, and she even insinuated I lied. I was over it. I was over them. I did end up contacting CPS, but not sure if anything came of it. I don't believe Henry was being abused. I've told this story to others, and people always ask me that, but no. I think Henry was born a sociopath, and his parents were enablers who never made him accountable for his actions, and the two together created a monster. I didn't hear from them for over a decade. I moved across the country, got married, and now I have kids of my own. My son is almost 6, and he has 2 little sisters that are 3. They fight, but he loves them and is so protective and knows what a healthy relationship between siblings looks like. A few weeks ago I got a friend request on Facebook from Elizabeth. She looks the same. A few more lines, but still very elegant and pretty. Her profile picture consists of herself and her now 4 children. I glanced across the photo until my eye caught a young man with thick curly hair and bright blue eyes. Henry. Henry ended up as stunning looking as expected. He is about to be a sophomore at a well-known elite American university. He plays for their soccer team and is majoring in business. He has a girlfriend and seems popular in his fraternity. This is all that I can gather through his public Facebook posts. Maybe he learned accountability and grew out of his mean-spirited and manipulative way. I can only hope that's true for his siblings' sake, as well as the well-being of those around him. For now, my family is thousands of miles away from you, Henry. I honestly don't care if we meet again. I handled you before, and I can handle you again. However, be it now or 20 years in the future, when my children are out on their own trying to find a place in the world, if you see them, don't ever touch them. I'm a girl and this happened when I was 20 in the early 2000s. People used landlines and cell phones were not unlimited. This happened in a town about an hour away from Sacramento. My friend was house sitting for a family that her family was friends with from church. She was to house sit in the country just outside of town for a week. They had animals like cats, rabbits, a donkey and a horse. The family also had dogs too, but they took the dogs with them. My friend was in charge of feeding the animals and watching the place. She didn't have to get the mail daily, because they had this metal lockbox-style mailbox down their long driveway. They didn't have any neighbours for miles, just fields of alfalfa, cattle and corn, so I guess the lockbox was for safety. Towards the end of the week she asked if I wanted to spend the night and keep her company, and I thought it sounded fun. I had moved out of my aunt's and uncle's and gotten my own apartment, so I told her I'd pick her up on the way there after I got out of work. We got there around 9:30 p.m, grabbing dinner on the way. We went into the barn first thing and fed the animals. It was late for their dinner and they made their hunger known with their animal noises. We made sure they had water, then went inside. The house was this big ranch-style house, single story. The living room was to the left as you walked into the home. There was a long hallway directly to the right of the entrance that led to where the bathroom and bedrooms were. Straight ahead was a dining area, and to the left of that was the kitchen entrance and a patio door. They didn't have an open floor plan. In the kitchen on the opposite side was also a long hall that had several doors. My friend explained that their wife ran a daycare center out of the house. These rooms were play areas for the kids she took care of. We didn't bother going over there because we had no interest. We watched some TV, ate our leftovers and talked about people we knew. As it got later, she turned on the house alarm and said she didn't like sleeping in other people's beds, so she had been sleeping on the couch, then offered it to me. She would sleep on one of the 2 huge recliners that reclined so far back it was almost flat. The chairs were really comfortable, so I just said I'd take the chair. I went and laid back in a chair with my blanket. We turned off the TV, and were talking for maybe 20 minutes in the dark, when the motion sensor floodlights started shining through the window, lighting up the room. Now I really have no idea why people in the country think it's okay to not have curtains or blinds, because to me that's insane. We both got quiet and Amanda says, "Maybe it was one of the cats." Then we start hearing gravel crunch, like a person walking across gravel in the parking area outside. My chair was closest to the window, and I slid carefully down to the floor, clutching the stupid blanket the whole time. The floodlight timed out, and my friend slid to the floor too. We laid on our stomachs in the dark, not knowing what to do for a minute, when we heard a loud bang, and all of a sudden the house alarm started blaring, and the floodlights turned on again. It was so loud we covered our ears, and I started to panic. I swear I have never been so close to peeing my pants in my life. I began crawling towards the keypad for the security, because I've seen the commercials. There's a button you push and a person responds to you in case of an emergency, or at least sends the police. The main screen says, Patio 1 of 2 open. Amanda starts to cry a little and hits the call assistance button on the pad and nothing happens. There's no assistance. I ask her where the phone is and she says there's a phone in the kitchen and one in the parents' room down the hall. So our choices are to go to the kitchen past the windows and next to one of the patio doors, or to go down the hall to the parents' room and use the phone there. I asked her where the other patio was, and she said it was in the daycare part of the house. It was an easy decision. We go inside the parents' room and it's pitch black. I ask her where's the phone and she says, I think we have to turn on a light. I really don't want to turn on a light, but have no choice. I don't have a flashlight, and I didn't bring my cell because I had limited minutes. It was a simpler time, and Amanda didn't even get her own cell until after this happened. She turned on the light and we started looking around the room. Not only did these people not have curtains on any window, but they didn't even have closet doors. We see a golf club leaning against the wall by the bed. They probably have it instead of a baseball bat, which is what I had next to my bed at home. We figured if we hit someone with it, it's going to leave a mark. She grabs it and we continue our search for the phone. Looking at the obvious places, we find a cordless phone stand minus the actual phone. The alarm is still raging. We have a light on, and the person who opened the patio door is bound to notice, is all I'm thinking at this point. She asks, should we use the locate phone buttons? I look at her and respond, yeah, if you want some strange guy coming in here with it and asking us if we were looking for something. I'm getting mad that I'm scared and in this situation. Standing there knowing that we have to go to the kitchen, the house alarm stops. It gets country quiet. If you've lived in the country, you know what I'm talking about. There isn't another golf club for me to grab, so I make her go out first, flipping every light on and keeping the doors we pass in the hall closed. We double-check the security panel, and it still says patio open. I hit the call button and it still doesn't work. Double-checking the front door is locked, we start for the kitchen. I tell her we have to check the patio near the kitchen, and I grab a big knife that wasn't even close to being sharp. We check the patio door near the kitchen and it's locked. We turned on all the lights and grabbed the phone and dialed 911. This phone isn't a cordless phone. It's one of the old ones, with a cord attached on a wall. My friend is on the phone with the dispatcher, telling her what happened, and I hear a whistle coming from outside the kitchen window. The thing people don't think about, because I didn't in my thinking that safety was turning on the lights, is while you have the reflection of the inside on the window, people on the outside have a clear view of you, unless you press your face against the window. I hear the whistle again. It sounds like someone trying to get someone else's attention kind of whistle, but I don't see anything outside, and I'm not pressing my face to the window to see if I'm the person they're whistling for. My friend is still talking to the dispatcher and is crying and saying she doesn't have the address to the house. She hands me the phone and I say, hello. The dispatcher lady, who sounds annoyed, tells me she needs an address to send police to. I ask that she trace the call and she says something like, you're house sitting and you don't even know where you're at. Scared, angry and overwhelmed, I hand the phone back to Amanda and start looking for something with an address in the kitchen. I'm looking in the junk drawer, on the counter, on the refrigerator, fully keeping an eye down the hall that has the daycare rooms, knowing that on the other side of one of those doors is a patio door that was opened. Amanda tells the lady that she doesn't pick up the mail because of their lockbox, and then a few seconds later removes the phone from her ear and stares at me with a blank face. I ask her if they're tracing the call, because I cannot find anything with an address. Amanda says low, she said, I hope the police find you in time, and hung up the phone. I was so scared and angry at the same time. We knew that there was people outside. We knew that the patio door, the daycare area, was opened. We did not know what to do. We stood in the kitchen silent for what seemed like forever, but was probably 1 minute. I picked up the phone and dialed 411. I told Amanda that they would have the number to the police department. As calmly as I could, I explained what was happening to us. I included the 911 dispatcher and said we really needed the phone number of the town's police department, when we heard a huge metal bang outside the kitchen window by the patio door. It sounded like someone dropped something metal and heavy. Amanda started crying, and I couldn't hold in my fear anymore and started crying too. I was thinking that whoever was outside was going to break open that patio door. The 411 operator said they were connecting us and would stay on the line, after getting pissed at the 911 dispatcher on our behalf. A police officer answered the phone and the 411 operator started explaining what was happening to the police. Then they were asked to disconnect once we had established a connection. The police asked a few questions and we heard the whistle again outside, and floodlights all around the house turned on again. I was too scared to look outside, and we had never turned on the patio light because we had to walk across the patio window to get to the switch. We told the policeman on the phone about the whistle, and he said that there should be several policemen showing up shortly and to stay on the phone. We were outside the town limits and knew it might take a few minutes. Having an officer on the phone made me feel a little bit better, but I was still really scared. He told us that the police arrived and were coming up the drive. The policeman said to put down the phone and open the door, so I did. What I saw was a police pickup truck with spotlights flashing into the pastures that ran along both sides of the driveway. 2 officers, not with handguns but with shotguns, walking slowly beside the truck as it came up the long drive. 4 officers approached the house asking us our names. One went to the phone and said they were here and hung up the phone. They ordered us to stay in the dining room and began searching the house. One by one they returned. The last one came back in through the patio door by the kitchen. He said he searched the barn and the horse scared him, and the horse also looked spooked. He asked what other animals were in the barn. They told us they didn't find anyone and that the daycare patio was not locked. There was, however, a broom handle in the track to prevent it from being opened too far. I looked at the patio door that the officer entered in and saw there was not a broom handle in that one, then felt dumb because he'd just walked through it. They lectured Amanda about not knowing the address of the house she was supposed to be responsible for, and other stuff I don't remember. After finishing statements, they said they'd stick around and look more, and if we wanted to leave, we could. They could lock the bottom lock one, but not activate the alarm, and we were cool with that. We were out of there so fast. We got into my car and went to her mum's. So mentally exhausted, we fell asleep, and I went to my office job the next morning. She said she really didn't want to go back to the house, but she had to feed the animals their breakfast. Her mum told her to take her sisters, and she did. That afternoon she called me at work. She was really nervous and began telling me that when they went into the house, there was footprints and poop on the carpet. I said it was probably the cop that checked the barn. She said she didn't know or pay attention. Also, she said that when they went into the barn to feed and water the animals in the morning, someone had tied all the rabbits' legs together in their hutches. They had 10 rabbits the kids used for 4-H. Amanda then continues to say there was a note with the word "Lucky" scribbled on the back of a pizza coupon she thought came from the refrigerator door because the flyer was missing a coupon. It took a while for them to untie the rabbit's legs, and Amanda asked her mum to find someone else from their church to finish the house sitting. She wasn't going back. She also told the officer what she came back to, but no one was ever caught, and the police never called either of us to update us. I wonder if this happened due to karma. One day I was in a popular cafe in Tiergarten, which is an inner-city park in Berlin. But I ended up leaving in a huff after being ignored for an hour with a hungry 2-year-old in tow, whilst a couple who arrived after me were served wine, lunch, and dessert. I just upped and left without cancelling my cake and coffee order, after being told off twice for getting up to ask the waiter where my order was. A few minutes later, I'm pushing the pram through the busy gardens, and everyone else had their kids in their bike baby seats, which flagged me as a tourist, but I didn't know that at the time. A man then rode up alongside me, and the conversation went like this. He said, "Hi, what a cute baby." "Oh, thanks." I had my rose-tinted glasses on at this point. I mean, he was damn cute. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Sydney. And you?" I asked this because he obviously doesn't have a German accent. It was possibly Middle Eastern. He pulled the bike in front of me, stopped and got off. "Excuse me, I have a question," he says. "Yes?" I say, smiling. He then produces a knife and says, "Money." And when I say produces, he was wielding said knife at my son about 50 centimeters away. I manage a no, and the man steps forward and is now 30 centimeters from my son, and moves the knife towards his stomach. For some bizarre reason, I felt kinda safe, because I have the pram as a barrier between him and me. But my son, definitely not. And there is no one within 500 meters despite being 4 p.m. on a Friday. Now for context, I used to work in a trauma hospital where I treated stab wound victims. I instantly flash back to the 21-year-old paraplegic who was intervening to stop a woman being harassed and was stabbed in the back, and the 30-year-old who ended up with a permanent colostomy bag after a similar incident. My mind says to just give him the money, but oh shit, how much do I have? Probably not enough. If I turn to get my backpack, he might stab my son. As these thoughts are running through my mind, my mouth takes over and completely loses control. I start screaming the most vile abuse that I have ever heard come out of my mouth. After this episode of mine, he just got on his bike and rode away. I, still screaming, grabbed the pram and ran after him. Must have been my adrenaline on override. Talking to the police later, they said they have 6 bikes in the park at all times trying to catch the gang, who normally attack in groups of 2. Obviously, I was such a vulnerable target, they thought one would be fine. Police said that this is the first time they'd threatened a kid though. I call my dickhead ex overseas, who is a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and 6'1", and would have totally protected us, if he hadn't run off to his mistress when my son was 3 weeks old, and says, "Why are you wasting time talking to the police? Our son needs to have dinner and go to bed." Not, "Thanks for protecting our son," or "That sounds horrible, are you okay?" One of the worst things about it is that the guy looked like a member of one of the very unpopular refugee groups in Germany at the time. I'm pro letting in refugees, by the way. And I kept thinking, you are totally spoiling it for everyone who legitimately wants to have a better, safer life here and everywhere else in Europe. Fast forward a few months and I'm camping with my son on a Sunday night back home. The campground was emptied out, and we were in the middle of a previously busy paddock, far away from 2 other groups. It's night time and the entrance gates have been locked for several hours, so day visitors should have left by now. There are heaps of signs telling them so, and I see a car driving up the hill heading straight for us. It stops and 2 men are inside. One starts to get out of his car to come towards me, and as he does, says in an eerily creepy similar manner, "Excuse me, I have a question." My alarm bells go off like crazy and I start screaming at them to leave us alone, or words to that effect. He starts to protest, but I threaten to call the cops, so they drive off. I call my dad crying and he says, "I hope your son doesn't learn that this is how you treat people when they want to speak to you. Try being a short petite woman, a lone protector of a toddler, previously never scared of anything, and now panics when people approach me camping alone in a paddock. I still don't know if I overreacted, or if my senses protected me."